Oh, okay. Hold me tight today, ladies, because I'm going to get raw and real and personal about my own healing for a moment, something I haven't really talked about a lot before. But I'm going to talk about the most complicated relationship in my life, my mother. So, if they knew you, they wouldn't like you. My mother she just snarled those words at me so many times, starting when I was really, really little, too little to have done anything to deserve them. I mean, it's not like I came out of the womb as some, little bad seed. I was just an average kid. And yet, according to her, I was already unlikable. I was already failing. I was a kid. So yeah, very, very early, I became wary. I was looking around at all the other little kids to see what they were doing differently. Yeah, I wanted to learn how to do kid right. And I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything they were doing so differently. So I had no clue what was wrong with me or why she kept hurling those words at me. And I wouldn't have any idea at all for decades. But as a kid, I took those words to heart. And we talked about this in module 1. I took those words to heart, those feelings, and then I'd shoot it all up to my brain, and her words and my feelings got all tangled up in my brain because I'm trying to make sense of them. I couldn't. So I'd parrot her words back to me, back to myself, like a mantra. Well, if they knew me, they wouldn't like me. If they knew me, they wouldn't like me. Just over and over. I mean, they're coming from my mother. And that one little sentence became my personal internalized story about myself. It drove everything. Now, for most of my life, I truly believed I must have done something wrong or let something awful happen, or maybe I really was just a bad kid and didn't know it. I was too little to understand that her words might have nothing to do with me or anything that I had done. But even as an adult, it didn't make sense. What did I do? But those words, they got hurled and reinforced frequently. Now, here are 3 examples. 2 of these happened before the age of 5. So my foot got badly cut while playing barefoot in the backyard, and I ran into the house. I'm tracking mud and blood onto the rug. And apparently, good little kids wouldn't have done that. If they knew what you had done, they wouldn't like you. And there was a reception. Our whole family was a reception, and somebody bumped into me and caused me to drop my little glass punch cup onto the tile floor. And of course, it broke loudly. Well, good kids wouldn't embarrass their parents that way. People wouldn't like you for embarrassing your parents that way. And then there was some kind of sexual incident. I actually don't remember the details. I spent years trying to remember the details and realized, well, when I realized that I didn't have to, that I could deal with the emotions, I let that part go. But anyway, I don't remember the details, though the feelings of shame and blame, they lingered well into adulthood. And her reaction was, well, things like that couldn't happen to good kids. If they knew let it happen to you, they wouldn't like you. Now, these 3 incidents had 3 things in common. I'd actually done nothing to make them happen, but she reacted as if they were my fault, and she just spat out some version of those hateful words, hurtful words. And of course, my brain's trying desperately to make sense of what's happening. Why was she blaming me instead of comforting me? Why did she act like this was being done to her instead of happening to me? And, when I got older, I started asking, were my pain, embarrassment, and shame meaningless? So my brain did what brains do. It tried to be logical. And my brain started telling me I must deserve it, even though I didn't know why. Well, all right. At this point, you might be thinking my mother was a monster. She actually wasn't. She was also the source for many of the qualities and interests that I like best about me. This is what makes it so complicated. My love of travel, adventure, walking, gardening, art, music, fashion, all came directly from her. She loved to dance. She taught me how to jitterbug. She took me to the symphony, and she made sure I got the ballet lessons that I loved. She also had a circle of really lovely friends who were kind of like all bonus moms. A lot of them had children who were my friends. But this is also where the darkness started appearing in a way that wasn't directly related to me, because she talked about all of them behind their backs. Criticism, jealousy, that's insecurity in disguise. Insecurity in disguise. And those were the running themes of the way she talked about her friends. Now, you could look at my childhood actually, and you could think I had it pretty good. And actually I did. But there's always a dark side, a shadow side, no matter how things might appear. I mean, we all have pain. We all have repressed emotions. We all have made nice, even though it didn't feel good. We have all been wounded, and we have all wounded other people. We need to remember that everyone, including us, lashes out sometimes when our woundedness leaps out of the shadows of the past and drives our behaviors in the now. Now, just because we all do it doesn't mean we should ignore it. Whether it's somebody did something to us or we did something to someone else, it doesn't mean we have to act all light and love while raging inside. That's emotionally dishonest. What it does mean is that we can handle those moments much better if we become more aware of what's going on and more compassionate, and if we have better tools and practices. Awareness, compassion, tools, and practices, they can help us. We're on the receiving end, so we can handle it better without blowing up or shriveling up. But they can also help us moderate ourselves when we're tempted to lash out or run away from someone or something. And they can help us deal with that pent up emotional backlog from our past, all those feelings that we tried to bury before we had awareness, compassion, tools, and practices. Now, the fallout from Mom's words and actions, that's been really easy to see throughout my life, especially in how I felt about myself and in how I inadvertently sabotaged myself and in how I related to people in general. I'm going to tell you something. Because I believed it so deeply, I actually turned it into a self-fulfilling prophecy at times. Yeah. A lot of my least helpful habits and autopilot reactions originated with the weight of those words. Feeling wronged began to feel normal. Relationships where I wasn't the scapegoat, they felt unfamiliar, and unfamiliar often feels unsafe and untrustworthy. Another thing was I didn't know how to tell the difference between pub chemistry and genuine attraction. I didn't know the difference between put on, everything's fine and wonderful, and genuine love and attraction. I would gravitate towards other outcasts, oddballs, and misfits while yearning to fit in. Never occurred to me that I might actually like fitting in with the outcast oddballs and misfits, but that came later. But anyway, I did learn to take the fall even while I was seething inside, just boiling inside. And other times, sometimes I would just blow up in people's faces. And who knows, maybe that was a show of artificial bravery. Maybe it was my inner toddler saying, you can't make me. Or maybe I was just fed up. But neither taking the fall nor blowing my top helped me improve the situation in any way. The story I had internalized was that everything was my fault and that I deserved all the bad stuff and that any good stuff was just a fluke. Yeah, I didn't trust the good stuff. Good stuff might happen and I might back away. Good stuff in my mind, driven by those words, good stuff only happened when I, slid under the radar somehow. So I really couldn't trust it. I couldn't believe it was really real. And since everything was my fault, and I guess everything I did had the potential of being bad, I developed a habit of having a running dialogue in my head whose single purpose was to create a justification for every move I made. It could be walking to the mailbox. Well, I walk to the mailbox now instead of an hour from now because blah, 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 or smiling at a random stranger. Well, I smiled at this person, but that doesn't mean anything. It wasn't an invitation. They probably wouldn't like me anyway. But I had this running dialogue that was half justifying and half telling me why it was dumb and stupid, and so was I. Even things like that could be like a squabble with your roommate or your spouse. Well, you didn't wash that dish the right way. I'd have a running dialogue about why I washed the dish that way, just in case I ended up needing to defend myself. I mean, come on. Is that any way to live? But those words, if they knew you, they wouldn't like you. They also fueled my fear of being seen. If I could remain invisible, they couldn't see me, and then by extension, they couldn't have reason not to like me. That was complicated, really complicated. Being seen doing something that gave bragging rights was expected. It earned public niceties, public compliments from mom, but privately it earned criticism. Being seen in any way that involves speaking up, contradicting, arguing, resulted in getting put back in my place hard, dredging up all the reasons it was my fault. I had to be taken down. Being seen making mistake, just any old human mistake, but that was unforgivable. Being seen for me felt both exhilarating and dangerous. My sense of self and my self-doubt, they were constantly at war. Maybe I really was a horrible person after all. And maybe the only way to be safe was to hide. But here's the thing. Hiding is not who I am. I'm naturally curious. I'm naturally adventuresome. I'm naturally a seeker. I'm naturally a reader and a researcher. I'm naturally something of a pioneer. I'm naturally creative. I'm naturally a leader. And I actually love people who are willing to break the mold. Those wonderful outcasts and oddballs and misfits. Those are the creatives. And I love women who refuse to be bland or beige and who refuse to conform mindlessly to just conventional norms. And I secretly knew that I was one of those women. That even though I was trying to keep it private, I was refusing to. And that set up a huge tension inside me that would bust out sometimes. Yeah, that wasn't pretty. But see, other people saw this in me. They saw that I was, curious and, a researcher and a pioneer and creative and a leader. They saw that. But even when they would tell me, I would dismiss it because these other modes, hiding felt more natural. I dismissed their compliments. Hiding felt more natural consciously. But deep within, all those other modes that are who I am, they actually felt more natural. But I had been well taught that those aspects of me were unacceptable. So I felt trapped. I was afraid to be me. and afraid to hide from me. So even now, saying or writing that sentence, that other people saw the potential in me, saw the goodness and the talent and whatever else, that kind of feels squirmy. The difference is that I notice that it feels squirmy now, and I know what to do. And I know that squirminess is actually an invitation into deeper healing. It's not really another condemnation of my shortcomings. In fact, it's not a condemnation at all. It's just me feeling uncomfortable with who I am when I'm told that's who I am. I have been conditioned to see my inherent traits as, disobedient, unladylike, embarrassing, but not as good qualities, and certainly not as welcome parts of my wholeness. And that conditioning made it easy for me to preemptively judge and reject some of my favorite parts of myself, which led to feeling squirmy when other people noticed or praised those parts. Surely they were just blind to my many flaws and shortcomings, and they couldn't be trusted. Self-judgment and self-rejection, those were my weapons in trying to remain unknown. If they didn't know me, they couldn't dislike me. I would be safe, and I would finally find belongingness. Judging and rejecting parts of myself before anyone else could also made me complicit, a partner in dismantling my own wholeness. Now, my complicity, that actually fueled resentment and rebellion. I resented being falsely accused of being too bad or too good. And so I rebelled. That's what we do. If I was going to be accused, criticized, and judged for being bad anyway, though, I might as well do the things they were accusing me of. That's part of the rebellion. That's like your inner toddler, or maybe your inner teenager going, well, I might as well. Maybe they'll be fun. Or maybe I was just self-destructing. Who knows? Funny how it didn't work the same way with being accused of being better than I thought I was, than I had been taught I was, really. Those accusations were sometimes taken as evidence that I wasn't hiding well enough, that there was almost a fear that I might be caught doing something well, being good at something. Helpful rebellion, because rebellion can be helpful. Helpful rebellion came later in life when I finally said, enough is enough, and committed to healing whatever it took. So there I was, this rebellious, divorced, single mother in my 40s, acting like both a recalcitrant teenager and a determined seeker. It was not a smooth, straight path. And through it all, I yearned for somebody to look behind that story facade to see who was really inside. See, I was still discounting those people who would compliment me on things I did well and say, oh, you're so this, and you're so that, and you're so good at this and that. No, I wasn't yet to the point where I believed they could see behind the story facade. That was still just a fluke. Nevertheless, I was yearning for someone to validate me and say it was okay to be me. I yearned for someone to say that I was not such a bad person. But most of all, I was yearning for permission. I mean, how many of us wait for that, for permission from somebody else to give us permission to just be ourselves? In hindsight, like I've been saying, I know many people did see my good qualities, but I wasn't ready to hear that. So I dismissed them. And I mostly listened to the voices that confirmed that awful internalized story because it was familiar. It came from sources that were supposed to be trustworthy, like my mother. And so I continued to listen through the filter of those awful words and believed they were the truth of me. But that began to feel like, or maybe gosh, maybe I always felt like two people were trying to live in my body, me and not me. The me I knew myself to be and the me they told me I was. So it was definitely not a peaceful coexistence. I was not balanced. I did not have inner balance. I did not have inner peace. I did not have inner confidence. It was a mess in there. And my self-esteem suffered. And I kept giving away too much of myself. If I give you this, will you love me? If I give you that, will you approve of me? If I give you this, will you believe that I really am a good person? So I gave away way too much of myself and I lived in fear. And then I tried to live small. And then I punished myself. So here's a couple more examples. These are from adulthood. Now, my former husband had the backing to start a business just a couple of years out of college. But there were conditions. My name couldn't appear anywhere. I had to sign away my dower rights. And my internalized story stood in the way of questioning whether those conditions were good or true or helpful or even necessary. I didn't question it. I've got stuff going on in here going, what? And say a word. During the marriage, though, I had very tearfully shared my mother's words. I mean, when you're close to someone, we do that. But instead of holding them in sacred trust, he repeated my confidence along with some embellishments of his own. And that same internalized story had prepared me to believe I must not deserve anything better. I must not deserve to be treated any better if both my mother and my husband could treat me this way. After that marriage ended, I started my own business. I've been doing it, but I started it for myself. I was very good at what I did, but I frequently caught myself hiding behind a curtain like the Wizard of Oz. My internalized story had convinced me it was only a matter of time until they figured out that I was really a fraud. Let's take a closer look at the Wizard of Oz. This is one of my favorite stories, but it's one of my favorite books, but I'm actually going to refer to the movie right now, the Judy Garland movie, because that's pretty familiar to most of us. So the wizard, he too figured, he was fearful. He figured out that he was going to get caught out as a fraud at some point. So, and maybe the residents of Emerald City had convinced him that no one would like him if he was just himself. He had arrived in a magical way, and they were certain that they needed his particular magic. Maybe they convinced him the only way to be accepted and, not executed or something was to match their expectations and appear to be a wizard in the way they defined a wizard. Maybe they convinced him he had to be who they wanted him to be and act how they wanted him to act in order to stay safe. Maybe, they put him on a pedestal, and he knew that people on pedestals are targets. They're targets. People want to knock them down. And maybe he only felt safe when he played the wizard in the way the people of Oz demanded, instead of relying on his own strengths and insights. Maybe he was afraid if they knew him, they didn't like him. And so the wizard was afraid of being seen as a human man, because that might be their definition of fraud. And yet he had to pretend to be the wizard they demanded in order to stay safe. So the wizard felt safe behind his curtain, but vulnerable when he stepped out as himself. That really hits home with me. That fear of being seen, or fear of being seen as a fraud, that's actually a whole cluster of related fears. We might be terrified that people will look for weaknesses to exploit, and We know we have plenty. We've been told that plenty of times. We might be scared they'll find out that we don't know everything, that we're still learning, and that means we aren't perfect enough. We might fear they'll measure us by the claims they made about us rather than accepting us as who we are. This was a big one. We might be afraid they'll get angry because we hold beliefs or opinions that are different from theirs. We might be afraid that the relationship will change or we'll get dropped and we'll lose what little connection we have and we won't be safe. Looking for acceptance and belongingness from other people, that can lead to perfectionism. And we try to tell ourselves that, oh, we're not perfectionists. We're just paying attention to details. Now, your own feelings will show you which is true. Are you trying to be perfect enough to earn their love and respect? Or are you respecting your own talents and abilities? Are you trying to be good enough for them to notice and like you? Or are you being true to your own standards? Are you trying to fit their mold? Or are you fully inhabiting your own? Are you trying to make an A on the test to give them bragging rights? Or are you making that A because you earned it on your own? I mean, just say those, repeat those phrases right there. Repeat them to yourself. You can feel the difference in your body. Let's play one of them out, okay? In some families, mine included, the role of the children was to give bragging rights to the parents without ever upstaging them in any way. Or if you did outshine them, give them all the credit, all of it. Your successes were theirs, your failures were your own. Now, it was explained to me in therapy that my parents needed me to make the equivalent of straight A's in all areas of life so they could brag because that reflected well on them, but never ever get too good at anything or be perceived as exceeding them in any way. So to please them, I had to be seen up to a point and invisible beyond that, because exceeding them, they took as like a criticism of them not doing better than they had. It really wasn't about me. But to please them, I had to be seen up to a point and then invisible. And of course, that line is invisible. And it can change without notice. And this pattern was seeping into all areas of my life, relationships, health, career, everything. But basically, it got translated into fear of success, period. Not just success in business. Notice how this one emotion, fear, sneaks in and takes on many faces, many faces. And notice how one fear leads to the next and the next and the next, as if it's contagious. And notice how these additional fears, they become interwoven with the original fear until they're separable and all just one great big fear tangle. And notice how fear masquerades as other feelings or behaviors. We don't always call it fear. So notice how fear in its many forms is the underlying emotion for so much of the past that we want to heal. Fear of any flavor is an intensely unpleasant emotion. And we experience it in response to perceiving or maybe recognizing some sort of danger or threat. But it causes both psychological and physiological changes that can result in behavioral reactions. Fear, what is it? What is it anyway? Well, it's fundamentally a belief that someone or something is likely to be dangerous, or it's threatening to cause some emotional or physical pain. So fear is really anticipation. It's anticipation that something bad may happen. Now, that does not make it imaginary, not at all. Fear is real. And actually, fear is essential. Fear may be reminding you that you've been here before and you learned something and you need to be on alert and you need to be ready to take action. But fear could also be something in the past casting a shadow over the present, because right now there's no real danger, but you're worried there might be. And either way, fear is a messenger. All emotions are messengers. Emotions they're our native language as humans. Words as we know them, they came later. Emotions are our original native language. When our sense of self, when our sense of self is wobbly, when we feel fragmented instead of whole, fear of being a fraud or of not being enough, that becomes central. And we tell ourselves people would not treat us the way they do if we didn't deserve it, even while admitting that we're angry and we feel wronged. We don't ask questions or stand up for ourselves for fear of offending, even while admitting that our questions and our opinions are valid. We put pleasing those people who have hurt us above looking out for ourselves and meeting our own needs, even while admitting that they have no right to hurt us, and we actually know what's better for us than anyone else. We've just learned to distrust ourselves too. We distrust everybody, including us. We subordinate ourselves, and then we hate the way we feel. We feel like we need to make everyone like us, which isn't possible, and then we feel like a failure. So I want you to consider this perspective from one of my own mentors. Her name is Simone Grace Soul. And this is from something she wrote on Instagram, I believe, but I immediately wrote it down. When you do you, 30% of the people are going to love it. 30% of the people are going to hate it. And 30% of the people are going to be like, no matter what. Those percentages are not exact, and they may slightly vary because, yes, I pull this out of my butt. That's Simone speaking. But this has been a very useful idea for me and has been for years. This whole thing's a Simone quote, by the way. So this has been a useful idea for me and has been for years. The point is there will always be lovers and haters and those who are just indifferent. So much wasted time and suffering happen because people just get stuck in a state of confusion, shock, and discomfort about that hating 30%. And you can't magically finagle reality so you permanently get more and less hate. It's just sort of a law of nature. That's me adding. But anyway, back to Simone. There's no self-improvement scheme, no spiritual healing, no state of enlightenment you can attain to make sure that you are immune from those 30% of the people having a shit opinion of you. And actually, there's only one thing that kind of works for this purpose, and that is being as beige, bland, and conforming to widely accepted standards as possible. But even that is not sustainable because widely accepted standards change, and you have to forever hustle to keep up. And also your soul might die. So make that decision, show up, do the thing. The terrible and wonderful secret is 30% will hate you anyway. Now, that's read with my one little insertion from something that Simone wrote, but it hit me where I live, as they say. And I would add that sometimes important people, spouses, parents, friends, colleagues, they actually fall into that 30% who just won't like you. And it may have nothing to do with you, not directly anyway. It could come from some little something that you do or don't do, or do or don't say that subconsciously trigger something in their own unhealed past, theirs. They may claim they know why it irritates them, but chances are all they really know is that it gets an emotional rise out of them. And surely you must be to blame, because the alternative is that it's coming from inside them. We all do this, and often, usually, without realizing it. So much unhappiness is caused by fighting against the past. So why do we do it? The past is just the past. That's it. It's a record of what has already happened. No more, no less. It can't be changed. It doesn't tell us who we are. It can't predict our future. It isn't a life sentence unless we let it dictate who we are and restrict our future. But that's on us, not the past. Whatever happened isn't proof that we are doomed to fail or that we are terrible people or whatever, no matter what they say. I mean, who gave them the right to have a say anyway? Here's what is true about the past. You listening? It happened. Some of it sucked. It happened. Some of it sucked. It's over. That's how I feel about 7th grade, and it is definitely over. It's over, and yet some of the hurts still linger because we took them to heart. I moved away from my hometown shortly after graduation and then returned over 30 years later. Now, the first few months were a whirlwind of reconnecting with old friends and classmates. And there are a lot of stories that began, you remember in 5th grade when so-and-so happened? Well, what became apparent was that some laughed at those stories while others kind of withdrew, almost like back into themselves. And some of those funny stories weren't so funny to everyone. In fact, some of them seemed to be downright painful. It isn't the event itself that hurts. Remember this, it isn't the event itself that hurts. What's a painful experience to one person could be just a blip or less for someone else, or even a happy experience. An event is painful, happy, or neutral based on our own unique emotional context. One of those funny stories was about a party I wasn't invited to, even though all my friends were. I mean, it was the party of the century for my age group. Everybody was there. Everyone except me, that is. And hearing stories of that party re-triggered my residual feelings of being outcast. And yet, here I was, hanging out with, all those girls who had no idea I'd felt that way. They had no idea I hadn't come to the party because I hadn't been invited. They didn't know that. They had never seen me as the outcast that I thought I was. But my internalized story, remember, was if they knew me, they wouldn't like me. So it seemed obvious that I hadn't been invited on purpose. And it still stung all those years later. It also wasn't true. I just couldn't get past the original story I had told myself. At its root, healing our past is always about our own quest for belonging. We believe it's necessary to heal all of those things to have the reunion with our wholeness that we want. Now, Simone's words caution us against getting hung up on the situations and people who will never welcome us. She reminds us there will always be some who don't like us, some who love us, a lot who fall somewhere in between. If we obsess about the group that isn't going to like us no matter what we do, we become our own problem. She reminds us to be our colorful selves, not, some bland imitation self, and let the people who love our full spectrum self flock to us. A college professor of mine kind of took it a step further. He said, if you aren't ruffling any feathers, you need to make sure you're breathing. You might be dead. And he might be right. As we release the chains of the past, some relationships will change. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. We don't have to fear it. Some relationships will actually grow deeper, more intimate, and more meaningful as we fully reconnect with our self. Others have already fizzled, but we haven't wanted to let them go. Some will outgrow as we heal, though we may not realize it until later. And we may not even notice until later. For others, we'll get closure, but that may come from within ourselves and not from the other person at all. As we stop seeing people and relating to them through fears or expectations or judgments, whether they're ours or theirs, it will begin to feel natural to allow some relationships to just slip away. Allowing our relationships to evolve along with us won't feel scary. We'll begin naturally gravitating towards relationships that feel good and nurturing. And as we build our emotional resilience, our lives are going to fill with supportive, enjoyable, reciprocal relationships. And we'll wonder why we ever waited. Why did we wait so long? And we might also wonder why we never felt or allowed ourselves to feel connections like this before. We might even notice that we had unconsciously pushed away or rejected some offered connections because of that internalized story. If they knew me, they wouldn't like me. Oh, better push them away before they get to know me and can, dislike me. And that comes right back to our own emotional history. It's our emotional backlog that needs clearing. That's what needs healing. That's what's making us feel like we've disconnected from our wholeness. There's probably a seminal event in each life that starts creating our emotional profile. For me, it could be those words from my mother. I mean, I don't remember the first time she said them. There was no explosive incident, at least not that I can remember. In fact, it seems as if those words were always there, pre-conscious memory. And yet they define me in so many ways. And here is where healing gets really interesting. We don't have to remember every incident that began with or resulted in getting hurt. We don't have to remember all those origin stories. We can work directly with the emotion. Fear, for example, since we've been talking about it, we can then unleash that emotion to become a detective in our system, seeking out hiding places in our system for similar instances of those feelings so they can get healed at the same time. Dozens of incidents and decades of hurts can be cleared in just a few minutes without having to pretend some things never happened, without having to pretend some things never hurt, without having to re-experience every awful moment. This is the foundation for the healing tools we use here in Story Shift. Because I thought I had to remember and talk about every hurtful moment, talk through it, in order to heal from it. I thought I would flunk healing because I would forget some incidents and they wouldn't get healed. I thought I had to acknowledge what they had done to me, and even they had to ask for forgiveness before I could forgive them for doing it or forgive myself for letting it happen. And I was so bad. I'm going to say that here. I was so bad about thinking, well, if they would only change so-and-so, then everything would be all right. If he would stop doing that, she would stop doing this, and he would do this, and she would do that, then everything would be fine. My expectations about what they should do was a big impediment to my own healing. It kept me angry about what had happened and what wasn't happening. It kept me angry at them for doing this to me. But it put them in charge of my healing, which made me feel victimized all over again. It kept me stuck in the past. Most of my expectations, and probably yours, could be lumped under the healing of myth, M-Y-T-H, misinformation you thought was helpful. Some of my myths came from, conventional ideologies. One of mine was that healing had to take a lot of time and a lot of hard work. It doesn't, but that thought persisted. So even when I experienced tremendous relief and release, I dismissed it as a fluke. I had to learn to trust my own experience, which took some healing of its own. Now, it still feels raw and vulnerable to tell my own stories, though sharing within a safe circle can be part of our healings. And I'm trusting all of you to be a safe circle. That trust, learning to trust, is strength building for my own healing. Receiving and protecting my trust can be part of your healing. And by sharing within safe circles, we find out that we're not alone, and we never were. We always belong, though maybe not with the people we were trying so hard to fit in with. Maybe trying to pretzel ourselves to fit in had been part of the stumbling block, part of the problem, and now it's part of the revelation, part of the solution. Maybe that can help us see why it wasn't all our fault, never was. Our internalized stories matter. They're always running in the background. They're like computer programming. They're always interacting with other people's internalized stories. And by sharing, we can begin connecting through these universal stories. There's a lot of emotional and experiential commonality in our wounds. The details are different, but the root emotions and feelings are the same. Becoming aware of the commonalities brings compassion into our interactions and helps address the divisiveness that keeps us feeling isolated and hurting. Now, it took a lot of healing for me to become ready to tell the story of my mother's hurtful words. And the telling has become its own kind of healing. Remember, the first person I told it to was my former husband, and he broke that trust to smithereens. Opening up, though, within safe circles, opening up a little and then a little more, has broken down those thick walls of isolation and self-doubt. Turns out many women, including some of those women I grew up with, have mother wounds. We just never talked about it. Talking about it wasn't the done thing. Sure, we complained about our mothers like all kids, but that isn't the same as having a good heart-to-heart with a safe friend or within a safe circle. And sometimes I do wonder how our lives might have been different if we had known we are not alone. But, then I remember how every moment and every experience brought me here now. And, maybe I wouldn't change anything after all. The story of my mother's hurtful words has a mostly happy ending. It does. When she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I was the child who could come home and help with her care. And I'm so glad, because without the filters of her old bitterness, she freely told stories from her past. Some were her glory moments and some were the hurt she still carried. Her big adventure, buying herself a bus ticket and moving from rural North Florida to San Francisco when she was 19. Meeting Dad while she was on another adventure, staying with cousins in South Carolina. But somewhere along the way, she gave up her dream of being an artist to chase the dream of being an upwardly mobile young wife. Partly it was the times. She could have done both even then, but for whatever reason, she thought it had to be one or the other. And yet that really was probably partly the times. But regardless, I never learned why. But it was my privilege to sit by her bedside during her final days and listen to her mumblings. Just listen to, she was telling her stories. She was talking to people. She was having conversations that she never got to have, or having conversations and realizing that they had played out in different ways and she'd missed it at the time. But these intimate moments with Mom cleared up a lot of misunderstandings for me. A year after she died, she visited me. She visited me. It was just a quiet, peaceful moment at home. I don't even remember what I was doing. Probably nothing special, most likely. But what happened next changed everything. I mean, just like I'm sitting here now, but it's like I saw her face and I heard her voice, and she was smiling. It was the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. And then after just a moment or two, she said, I did it all for you. If I had loved you differently, you wouldn't have learned to love yourself. And when I say it now, I get chills and I almost gasp, but inside that brief message was the genesis for preventing a pattern from forming. A pattern in my life, maybe my daughter's lives, their daughters' lives, a pattern of giving up our dreams to fulfill expected roles. My grandmother, she was a maverick who married against her parents' wishes, which was really not the done thing back in that time. My mother was a maverick who took herself on grand adventures and then, for some unknown to me reason, chose a role instead. Then she tried to squash the maverick in me to fit the role she had chosen for herself. And I so hope I did better by my own daughters. So many years of believing that we meaning her family and me in particular, had stolen her dream from her and that we were responsible for her unhappiness. Turns out it wasn't that she didn't love Dad or us three kids. She was bitter about some of her own choices, didn't know what to do with her bitterness. And I was finally able to feel compassion for her younger self, who had thought it would all work out differently. She was angry that some of it didn't, and she didn't know what to do with her anger. And so I was finally able to make peace with the hurtful parts of our complicated relationship. And I was finally able to forgive her. And I was finally able to forgive myself and set myself free. And you don't have to wait as long as I did. As humans, we experience everything through emotion. It's a physiological experience or state of awareness that gives us information about the world, both inside us and around us. And within a nanosecond, that emotion morphs into a feeling, which is the meaning we attach to that information. And that's the beginning of the story we tell ourselves about what that experience means and what it says about us. And at that point, we have a choice. We can discard that story or internalize it. Now, the ones we internalize may be helpful or they may be unhelpful, but either way, they become our unconscious, subconscious, and our operating system. They're running invisibly in the background like computer programming. Now, therapies that deal primarily with cognitive remedies, they're helpful, sure, but they're addressing those experiences at the conscious level. And so it can take longer to find and address the subconscious emotional root, if they find it at all. Once we realize how this works, we can use it to depersonalize how other people treat us. We won't take everything they say and do personally. We won't take it all to heart. The words Mom spoke to me came from some unhealed incident or group of incidents in her own life. They didn't really have anything to do with me. And I actually don't have to know the details to heal the wounds they caused in my life. This is how we break the bonds of ancestral patterns and heal generational traumas. But finally, making peace with her and my past with her, finally, there were answers to questions that had driven my life. What's wrong with me? Nothing. Why do people only want me if I conform to who they want me to be and what they want me to do? Well, that's about their own need to heal, or maybe more accurately, their need to avoiding their own healing by taking it out on me or you. How did I keep ending up in the same old relationships and situations where the only way to be accepted was to pretend to be someone I wasn't, pretend to be who they wanted me to be? Well, repetitions are a roadmap for our healing. They're showing us where we could use some healing. And the biggie, or one of the biggies for me, was why wasn't enough to just be me? Well, it was, and it is. By dealing directly with the underlying emotions, we can feel the results of our healing almost immediately. I kid you not. This is fast stuff. The word miracle, yeah, it gets overused these days, which is too bad. But for me, this felt like the kind of miracle that happens in fairy tales. Only this was real life. It was my life. My life. Two favorite quotes come to mind when I think about this. One is from C.S. Lewis. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. Great message. Great thing to remember. It was the thing I would hold on to on days when I thought I couldn't hold on at all, that I was barely hanging on by my fingernails. Another one is from John Kabat-Zinn. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. We know we can't go back and change anything that's already happened, and that's okay, because we're finally realizing that we can change the stories we tell ourselves about what it all means and what it says about us at the root. That pretty much accomplishes the same thing. And yes, we can do that without having to pretend something's ever happened or didn't hurt. There's a much better use for those parts of our history. Yep, learning how to surf, learning how to heal, remembering that we are whole and enough, and we always have been. Seeking our healing is just another name for welcoming ourselves back home into our original innate wholeness. It's our natural state of wholeness where we can be real, vulnerable, connected, safe, relaxed, balanced, and accepted, no matter what's going on in our lives or in the world around us. In our natural state of wholeness, we always belong, warts and all. And we remember that warts are just pieces of ourselves that somebody else didn't like or we didn't accept. They're just unloved little bits of our self. They didn't leave. They didn't get lost. We shut them out. And that means we can welcome them back in. And once we begin remembering that we were born whole and wholly in love with ourselves, even if we've forgotten, and even if that idea feels strange, our whole perspective begins changing. Once we begin gathering our unloved pieces back home to ourself, no person or circumstance can ever make us feel homeless or fragmented or isolated or anything again. Healing, you know what it feels like? Healing feels like freedom. It feels like freedom from circumstances, freedom to change circumstances or not, whichever you want. Freedom from other people's expectations, freedom from guilt and worry about getting it right, freedom from feeling weighed down by our baggage, or freedom from having so much baggage to weigh us down, freedom from needing to control everything and everyone, freedom from trying to be or do something that could never give us the freedom and security and wholeness we crave. And that's the freedom to be fully human, to be fully and wholly ourself. And then, one day you'll be able to look back and realize how extraordinary your life has been. I used to think having an extraordinary life was only for the privileged few who were born in the right place at the right time to the right family in the right circumstances. I did. I thought that. And then I got schooled by someone who had none of those things and yet believed her life had been extraordinary. While here I was, I had most of them and believed my life was a painful mess. Perspective. When you begin healing and gathering yourself back home to yourself, you'll stop frittering away today's minutes, wishing that the past had been different. Well, you may not like everything that happened, and that's okay. You're still wholly you and always have been. And like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, I do like this story. Like Dorothy, you'll realize that if you ever have the urge to go looking out there for your heart's desire, there's no need. There's no need to go any further than your own backyard, because if it isn't there, you never really lost it to begin with. It's began waiting patiently for you to come back home and finally see it. Looking for your heart's desire out there somewhere, that's futile. We all do it, but it's still futile. And I suspect it's also by design. We seek our purpose. What's my purpose? And we explore our options and we get lost and we get found. And it's a beautiful, complex, glorious, and sometimes painful part of being healing. And I believe yet another lesson from The Wizard of Oz. All yellow brick roads lead to Oz. If Dorothy and her pals had taken a different turn, they might have missed the flying monkeys, but encountered fire-breathing dragons instead. No road is without its challenges. No life is without its challenges. Though the details of our individual woundedness and the paths we choose for our healing are unique, the goal is the same. Consciously, deliberately reuniting with our wholeness. And that means healing from our emotional root, the emotional root of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, the ones that become our internalized stories that are running the show. Okay, since this module has been full of quotes, I love quotes, but I'm going to leave you with one more. This one's from T.S. Eliot. He said, we shall not cease from exploration. And at the end of all our exploring, the end of it all will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. The place we will arrive at is where we started, our wholeness, and we will know it. And maybe that's the first time or feels like it's the place time. But where we will arrive is back home to ourselves. Thank you so much for letting me share some of my own healing journey with you. We're not alone. We're not alone. And we don't have to do it by ourselves. And let's together and let's start remembering that we are whole. We're fine. We're enough. Sure, we hurt sometimes. But now we know what to do. We're learning what to do. I love you so much. I thank you so much for sharing this with me. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next lesson.